Okay, for those of you who found the preceding pages somewhat difficult because she uses the word consubstantial like 20 times without ever really explaining what that means, probably because it's nearly impossible. Take heart, these last 6 pages of this magnificent book, which is in 3 or 4 pages for me, are very personal. And I was looking all morning for this quote by, I think, Empedocles, which I actually painted out on a big sheet and hung up on my wall when I first got to Antigua 6 years ago. Something like, love is the source and foundation of all being. Without love, nothing would exist. And then she says, Aristotle poo-pooed that, and then she says poo-poo for too bad for Aristotle. So in other words, this is something that she probably agrees with. And the reason why I'm bringing this out is because obviously for her, the Trinity is very selfless. There is no self in God. So the whole thing of compassion, mercy, personal love and care and concern for humanity, for all of that, she calls all of that Mary. And she says it's in the heart of the Trinity. And she also says that when she came to understand Christ, that she found Christ smack dab in the middle of the Trinity. And she says that Mary has a way of fading away into Christ or revealing Christ. And obviously, as we've just heard, she's drawing parallels between the two. So just things for you to think about as you hear these last few pages. Again, she says some amazing, outlandish things, one of which is on the next page. The only good thing God ever did for man was reveal its own immanent mother. Obviously, not the only good thing God ever did for man, but I think she's showing it was the first thing. And, the whole thing we call Christianity now comes because that happened first. Page 504, Appendix 3, Theotokos, a personal note. It has been a joy to write this on Mary. It expresses what she has meant in my own life from as early as I remember, even before I knew God. It is tempting to give some account of my life with Mary, but since this is not the place, I will only say that from birth, for me, Mary has always been of a totally transcendent nature. My understanding of her can be summed up with an incident when I was either 2 or 3, helping my mother set up the Christmas creche. She would unwrap the figures and hand them to me to position in the creche. Unwrapping one figure, she said, "Oh, here's Mary, the mother of Jesus." And when I looked at that statue, the words instantly came to mind. Is that all she is? Never for a second in my life did I believe a thing like that she was just the mother of Jesus. Even when having to admit she was once an historical figure, I dismissed this out of hand as irrelevant. I could never relate to the biblical figure of Mary. For me, not only did Christ utterly transcend the biblical figure of Jesus, so too Mary transcended the biblical figure of Mary. As it turned out, in my life I never found God to be merciful, caring, kind, considerate, or remotely comforting. As she's marginally, she says elsewhere, God is not a respecter of persons. That which respects persons, according to Bernadette, is Mary. I should say she, I don't know. We don't get hung up on pronouns. As a youngster, God let me know it had a work to do in me. So forget anything I wanted. Anything going on in my personal life mattered nothing to God. I learned early God was no respecter of persons. Absolutely. God never cared for who I was. God's work is concerned with what we are, not who we are. Mary, on the other hand, is the one who cares for who we are as human persons, cares for what is going on in our mundane lives. She is the essence of divine compassion, understanding, mercy, caring, everything human. She was not revealed as mother for nothing. Mary cares more for man than does the Trinity itself. She is the only heart of God. She is the conduit conduit of every miracle and grace, even the conduit of every prayer to God. As said, I learned early, age 7, it was useless to pray to God. God's sole concern was with some work it had to do in me. Couldn't imagine what that was, and didn't even like the idea of God interfering with my freedom and choices. The most terrible mistake I ever made was, at age 9, physically ill and at the bottom of the barrel. In desperation, I turned to God, an aura of light in the center of my being, and begged it for some help. Marginalia, she writes obviously about this in her autobiography, Contemplative. More marginalia. Could growth in the spiritual life be linked to learning to walk and eventually have the courage to run as fast as possible down a hill because you know that if you trip, you will be embraced by your loving mother? Back to the text. And what did God do? That light faded to a pinpoint, and in its going out suddenly exploded into a black hole that took over just about all the space in my being. I totally collapsed, mentally, physically. There was never an incident in my life comparable to this cruelty. If this taught me any lesson, it was never ever pray to God for anything, and I never did. So much for God's work in man. The only good thing God ever did for man was reveal its own immanent mother. I do not know what God would do without her. For myself, I'd have been totally lost. Something else I learned from this horrible mistake of turning to God for help. This is the conviction that if someone really sees God, sees and knows the Trinity like the back of their hand, it does not cross their mind to ask God for this and that, nor to complain or praise as if God was some object of worship or devotion or one's valet. It is not a matter of this seeming inappropriate. Rather, it is just not how this experientially reality works, how this experiential reality works. God is not there for me, myself, and I. Rather, me, myself, and I are there for God. God and man are in business. We are God's business, and God is our business. But this is why those who make a big issue about God as either personal or impersonal don't know what they are talking about. God transcends this meaningless dichotomy. The point is this: while God's work is transforming man's human nature, transforming all into Christ, Mary is the one who cares for the person and everything going on in their mundane day-to-day life. So while God takes care of what we are, human nature, Mary takes care of who we are. If God had not planned it this way, then of course it wouldn't be true. Although God's transformation of nature can be called a grace, yet grace is God's ordinary operandi, and not an answer to prayer, nor is grace for the benefit of any person, but only for man's nature. So as marvelous as God's transforming work in human nature, Mary's prerogative is care for the individual person, who one is. Because her particular function in God is seeing to the mundane concerns of people's lives. This is why she has been revealed as mother. Where God's concern is with man's essential nature, Mary's concern is with the individual person. I have heard it said some people fear having a devotion to Mary lest it subtract from their devotion to Christ or to God. Mary, however, can only lead one to God because the two are inseparable. She even has a way of fading into Christ, as if she were the other side of the same coin. Just like true love of God is not a devotion, so too, true love of Mary is not a devotion. Marginalia. In what way is Mary God's own immanent mother? She will be very important in the consuming of who, as the Logos Spirit transcendent, are concerned with consuming what we are. I have heard it said, true love of Mary is not a devotion. I've always had an aversion to the term devotion because it smacks of sentiment and feelings. True love of God and Mary